Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining our first panel session for the year. We're excited. We've got a few guests on our panel that are very experienced in their relevant area. Today, we've got quite the agenda to get through, a lot of topics that we want to talk about. So I'm going to jump right in and run us through what our day is going to look like here for the next hour. So we're going to cover a little bit of housekeeping, a little welcome message that I'll deliver. I'll give a little background on who we are, 360 Advanced, and then we're going to do some quick intros of our panelists and talk a little bit about what their businesses focuses on. We're going to give a little history, and when we get into the topics, we're going to talk the history of national cybersecurity initiatives, how NIST 853 and 171 are impacting the landscape, and how they tie into the standards that we're talking about today. And we're going to get into some of the newly proposed items within CMMC and how FedRAMP relates to CMMC. We're going to save a little bit of time at the end for Q&A, and I'll try and filter in some of the questions as we get them along the way that are relevant to the topics we're talking about. So 360 Advanced, we're a cybersecurity and compliance firm. We deliver cybersecurity compliance services around many different standards. We're a licensed CPA firm, high trust assessing organization, PCI for a QSA firm. Well, I can't even think of all of them. ISO certifying body for 27001. We are an RPO for CMMC, meaning we can help organizations prepare for CMMC. We are working on our licenses for C3PAO for CMMC assessment services, as well as 3PAO for FedRAMP services. So among many of the different standards out there, anything cybersecurity related, we really try to focus on and help our organizations that we work with become better in all things that they're doing related to cybersecurity, but also with compliance. Eric, you want to flip? So today, like I said, we're joined with some experts that I'd like to have introduce themselves. Matt, we'll start with you, and we'll just go left to right here. If that's right.
Sure. Hey, it's good to be with you. I'm Matt Hoper, cybersecurity solutions area lead and cybersecurity consultant. It's a big long title. It doesn't quite fit on a business card, but we'll just go with cybersecurity consultant. I'm with Edwards Performance Solutions. I've been here a little over 2 years. We do CMMC services, compliance assessments, pen testing, IR planning. The last couple of years I've been heavily involved with CMMC. We are a C3PAO. I myself am a CMMC certified professional and assessor. Prior to joining Edwards, I led the security practices at 2 different MSPs. So for any MSPs on this call, I feel your pain. I know what keeps you up at night. But yeah, it's good to be here. Forbes Education Advisory member, a bunch of letters behind my name that most people don't care about, but some people do. But it's good to be here and join with Jason and Jacob for sure.
Thanks, Matt. Jacob, I think we're having a little bit of video issue, but I believe your audio is working. You want to introduce yourself and your organization real quick?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. I'm Jacob Hill. I'm a director of cyber operations at give me 1 second.
Getting the video going.
Just got some double speak here. Sorry about that. I'm a director of cyber operations at a defense contractor and also the founder of GRC Academy. At GRC Academy, I offer some CMMC overview training for the DIB, and at my day job, director of cyber operations, we're a defense contractor, cybersecurity firm focusing in Scout services and some other stuff going on there, and just excited to be here. So thank you very much.
And Jason.
Yeah, so I'm Jason Sprouser. I am the Director of Product Management Compliance Services for a MSP based out of Huntsville, Alabama called Summit 7 Systems that provides solutions to the defense industrial base. I am a CMMC certified professional, CMMC provisional instructor. I also serve as a member representative on the board for the MSPs for critical infrastructure and co-host a podcast with Jacob Horn called Sum It Up.
Very good. And my name is Brad Lyons. I'm a senior practice director with 360 Advanced. My role is overseeing a portion of our book of clients that do compliance services, as well as subscribe for our managed services programs to help in cybersecurity compliance. All right, so let's jump in. Guys, today, I think we wanted to start, Jason, I believe the first one I'm going to take to you, and really it goes with the history of how are we getting to CMMC in the current state. Can you give us just a little background on how we've gotten to where we are, and where are we in this cycle of getting to CMMC and organizations needing to consider certification for level 2?
So I come with the shortest introduction, and you pick on me first. That's what happens here, right? So essentially, this is how we got here, right? Or where we arrived to where we're at, right? We just got a rule 32 CFR part 170 that basically is the programmatic rule for CMMC. But this all kind of started way back when, and depending on who you listen to or depending what videos you watch, there is a good one that we should probably reference. You know, the fascinating history of CMMC by Jacob Horn. Shameless plug, I admit, but starting back with basically Executive Order 13556, which is just a little bit about 13 years old at this point, issued in 2010, which kind of established the uniform program for safeguarding and dissemination controls, and excluding classified information, which essentially turns out to be what controlled unclassified information. And spin forward, a few years to be brief here, and you get to what's called CMMC and the introduction of the CMMC program in 1.0, and all the trials and tribulations that went along with it. Spun around for a couple of years, and then in 2021, announced in 2021, November of 21, we get CMMC 2.0, which is DoD assuming control, making some changes to the program, necessarily how it's effective, what's going to go on with it, and then starting this snowball process of rulemaking, which we just seen come to an end just around Christmas, right?
Very cool. Matt, this next question I want to take to you. Can you give us a little understanding of how NIST 853 and 171 kind of played together, and how 171 really plays into CMMC, and how that plays together, I guess?
Sure. So 800-171 is a subset of 853, and it focuses mostly, I would say mostly, on the confidentiality of data. There's not a whole lot with like availability and integrity. It's mostly confidentiality. So while, oddly enough, backups are not required in 800-171, the confidentiality of backups, should you back up, and please back up, the confidentiality of backups is a control in 800-171. So it's mostly around the confidentiality of data, and it's that subset in 800-171, those 110 controls currently under Rev 2, that we are focused on when it comes to CMMC.
And I think I had this down as a question I wanted to ask, because I've watched some of the webinars on this stuff. I'm not an expert on CMMC, but is it going to be Rev 2 that everyone needs to plan for, or is it going to be a Rev 3 and everyone's got a moving target? Because I think I caught some of that in prior information I've.
So this is kind of an interesting part of the rule. When you look at DFARS 7012, it talks about safeguarding cover defense information and incident handling reporting capability, and it references 800-171. It doesn't specify what revision, because it's just assumed that it's the current version of 800-171. But the rule that dropped specifically mentioned Rev 2, which is somewhat problematic because Rev 3 is waiting in the wings, right? It's almost upon us. I believe that the final draft period ended already, didn't it, Jason?
So the final draft period ended. You still have the comment period. The comment period.
I meant the comment period. So is the comment period still open for the final draft?
Right, till the 18th, right? Yeah, let me double check. It was extended. Okay. Originally, it was shorter, and then they extended it because of the holidays.
That's right. That's right. So yeah, we're nearing the end of that, and once that's done, they go through all the comments. NIST will publish the final draft of Rev 3, but then you still have this rule CMMC that's talking about Rev 2. So yeah, it's somewhat problematic as the way I see it. It's different than the previous DFARS rules, which reference a certain subset. They don't talk about the revision, they just talk about the actual publication. So we'll see how that goes. Right now, it's full speed ahead on Rev 2. Rev 3 has got to be coming, I would think. It would be interesting to me to see a rule that's finalized that is now outdated because there's a new revision. So
Makes sense. And right now we're in the comment period for CMMC and the proposed rule. I believe that's a 6-week period. Is that correct? When that's ending somewhere in February? Is that right?
February
February
26th, it started, the clock started on December 26th. It's a 60-day period.
And then what do you anticipate for the period of time that they're going to ingest all the comments and try and figure out, okay, what is the final rule? When do you anticipate them rolling out a final, this is it?
Gosh, I hate speculating on timelines because I'm always held to it. But given the nature of this rule, the impact and how many organizations are impacted, I expect there's going to be a lot of comments, and the DoD is going to go through all of those. My guess is maybe a year, 9 months to a year before it's all said and done. I mean, you're going to get different schools of thought. I don't work inside the government, so I can't specify. You know, I can't be specific in that, but it's going to take a while.
Got it.
Yeah, so
Okay.
normally there's like a time bound. There's studies and people have gone through people with sicknesses and addictions to rulemaking and the quirks of it, not taking any jabs at anybody, and analyze exactly, you know, the timeline. And on average, it's like 233 business days is something, you know, around there is what it takes for them to, on average, adjudicate it, right? But like as Matt mentioned, very highly impactful rule with a lot of caveats and a lot of intricacies to it. And so more than likely, and it's got a lot of attention. It's not more than likely, it has a lot of attention. And so there's a lot of attention, and you see a buzz of it throughout social media now that basically leads you to believe that the comments are going to be plentiful. There's going to be a lot of comments and a lot of comments for the DoD to sift through. And they release guidance on those comments, right? To say, like, this is the way that you craft a good comment. You know, these are the suggestions that we make for you to craft a good comment. Don't just say CMMC is bad, right? Or don't say that FIPS validation is terrible, or whatever it is, whatever your opinion may be.
Right.
It needs to be, this is bad, this is the reason why it's bad, and then offer trade-offs, right? You need to give good quality comments that are constructive. Also, it's not just comments about what they got wrong. Sometimes you need to take time, set it aside, and make comments on the things that they got right to make sure that those things stick around in the rule too. A little justification, a little nudge, way to go, buddy, right? Like to the DoD. Thanks for putting this in there. And there's quite a few nuggets like that that are throughout the rule. Plenty to improve on. A lot of stuff where we're getting, you know, technical about grammatical stuff. And then I think as we go later on and throughout this webinar, I think we may hint at the way to effectively, you know, just provide public comments for the rule itself.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, and Jason, you mentioned 233 days. If the Vegas odds were 233.5, I'd probably take the over.
I would too.
Based on this, but
not a gambling man at all. But yeah, I would.
I think that's good. I'd be.
I don't think the unders hit. The under has not hit on anything thus far.
Right.
So
Right.
We just go with trends here.
Yeah, the interesting thing here about going back to 800-171 revision 3, NIST had a webinar maybe a few days ago, and they said that it'll be finalized around April, May timeframe, something like that. And so from what I understand, CMMC will have to undergo a rulemaking activity to adopt NIST 800-171 revision 3. The interesting part about that, though, is if you look at the timelines of them going from NIST 853 Rev 4 to Rev 5, I mean, it's a number of years in between that. So it will be interesting. I mean, you saw the FedRAMP memo. That's a whole nother discussion. They definitely hold industry to higher standards. So they could throw it over the fence much sooner than the normal, period that they hold themselves accountable to. But the other interesting thing is there is the FAR case that is for the FAR requiring 800-171 revision 3. So DoD contractors, if they're also work for other federal agencies, could be in a weird situation with federal contracts requiring one version, DoD contracts requiring another version. So it's just something to keep an eye on for sure.
Yeah, there's a potential, like a snowball potential here for things to get out of hand very quickly if this isn't addressed appropriately, right? And there's not a plan behind it, because what we know from NIST and from Dr. Ron Ross and Vicki Piliteri, what they've kind of told us and they've hinted at with this CUI series is a aggressive revision cycle, right? You saw that they finished 171. It's in the draft. All this comments are going. It's about to go final for revision 3, and they've already started on 172. Well, if this happens in succession, they're talking about maybe an 18-month to 24-month cycle for revisions to get this to the plan, because this is a step, right? This revision number 3 of 800-171 is a step to changing the format of 800-171 to more resemble 853, right? And to turn it into what they like to call the CUI overlay, right? So when you talk to Dr. Ross and when you hear them talk about it, it's more like a CUI overlay in progress. And we had a chance to speak to him on our podcast. And when we spoke to him, one of the questions we asked is like, how far along would you estimate that this is? And this is about, we're past the halfway point, I think is what he said, if I remember correctly. So there's still more that needs to happen for this to turn and to be formatted more like 853. And those are going to happen very aggressively. And what we can get into a point is that if we're with a rule, we just saw that a rule took, what, 2 years? So if we're stuck with a rule that's hard coding revision 2, and revision 3 is what's required as a part of DFAR 7012, and we know that those are going to act one and alike when it comes to contracts, right? You can't have CMMC contract clause without 7012. Like that, they're the same thing. They're based on the same thing. And so you could get to a point where contractors are required to comply with NIST 800-171 revision 4 as a part of DFAR 7012, and we're stuck in a rule that, like you said, is antiquated, and they're on Rev 2. And that introduces a lot of problems, because there's going to be some delta and some abnormalities or some changes to the system based on compliance with that. Now, functionality wise, maybe not so much, not a huge change to what's already established in a foundation, but we just talked about it, and Matt said, like, don't do backups. The same thing is like, like do backups, please, even though it says not to do backups. Luckily, 171 Rev 3 says to do policies and procedures, because you're going to have policies, procedures, and documents and evidence that map back to these individual controls. And if we're on 2 different guidance documents from NIST, it's going to map back to different numbers, and it's going to cause a lot of confusion. And it's already a confusing topic, right? For people like me that read this every day, and Matt that read this every day, Jacob that read this every day, same thing with the 360 Advanced people. It may be a lot easier to digest, but we're not talking about us digesting it for everybody in the DIB, all 220,000 organizations, right? We're talking about us digesting it for the people that are lucky enough to afford that aren't going to try to do this on their own. So you're already ingesting and trying to, translate a foreign language, which I call it NISTese, right? But it's this foreign language that's written in this computer engineer, cybersecurity engineer language, right? That people have to decipher what exactly it means. And now you're asking them to do it on 2 different books. And that can be a huge problem if it's not addressed properly. And the best way to address it right now is to use the democratic process and to submit a comment and say, what are you thinking?
That makes sense. Jason or team, I'll open this up to anybody who wants to speak to it. You've been doing this for a little while. What is the general timeline for an organization that's just realizing, hey, we have CUI in our system, we're working with the government, we're probably going to be level 2. What do we do? What are the first steps, and what does the timeline look like for them? And I know the answer almost always is it depends to some degree, but is the level of effort small, medium, large? Is the timeline 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months? When should they be considering these things? I'm guessing anybody who's watching this video is, at that level 2, if they're thinking about it and they haven't started that journey, now is always the best chance, right, to think about these things and be forward thinking for your organization. But making those first few steps are critical always in a journey, right? So I don't know if anybody can speak to this and what they've seen.
I'll take a stab.
Go ahead, and then I'll take a stab.
Yeah, so like back before I worked at Summit 7, I was in the trenches of the DIB as a consultant working with small, medium, large businesses trying to meet CMMC. So like kind of familiar with those efforts, how long that would take, right? And then that translated once I got to Summit 7, a conversation, and as an organization, we kind of dug in and, everybody contributed to figure out in our customer timelines, like how long is this taking to get done? And not just the tech implementations that may take a couple weeks or maybe a month and a half or 2 months, but the building, the change of the culture that's required and the building of the processes, tasks on the back end, the formulation of the governance documentation, and all the things that need to be put together to not only implement this, but to prove that you've implemented it as well, because that's half the battle. And that's usually about 12 to 18 months is what we think is a very, very sound estimate of the time it would take, for you to get certified. And if you think about that timeline right now, Matt, you just talked about the over under 233 days. The last time I checked, 12 months is 365, and then half of that, we're talking about what, 563 or something like that. Quick math, sorry, CUI math, and essentially, so you're talking about 500 plus days that you, starting from 0 to 100, 0 to certified, that you need, and we're talking about a rule that may put it in contracts, which is a different discussion altogether. I think we should get into it at some point. That's going to put it in the contracts and make it at least mandatory from the government at this point in time. And there's other factors that go into that as well.
Yeah, I like the 12 to 18 months timeline. It really depends on resource availability and money, because other things come up, and a project of that magnitude, you're more than likely not going to be able to devote 100% of your resources to it 100% of the time. So you always add in a little bit of a buffer. If you say 18 months, it's probably going to end up being more like 2 years. Now, if you're an organization that can throw a whole bunch of money and a whole bunch of resources at something, you might be able to do it in less time. But keep in mind that some of the controls in NIST 171 have a maturity aspect to it. So you have to show that you've been doing it for a while. It's not like something you can just do in a week, given unlimited resources and unlimited dollars. Just like I said, there's a maturity aspect to it. But I like the 1 year to 18 months. And then, I worked with some organizations at an MSP where you had that, hey, we can get there in a year, but things always come up, right? There's always something that diverts resources or time, and that adds, a month or two can go by very quickly. So
yeah, coming from a defense contractor standpoint, as I am today, I think Jason and Matt are right on with that, 12 to 18 month time period. I think just thinking about, back over the years when we first started and the experience, what I will say is that we're a cybersecurity company, so we were fairly comfortable with tackling it on our own. But for a lot of the small businesses who don't have that type of expertise or that type of personnel, I think they will be leveraging the MSPs and all that stuff, and that will definitely help. You have to have someone, someone's trusted and knows what they're talking about and what they're doing. But I do agree with that 12 to 18 month time frame, just based on what I've seen and how things go. And the one thing I will say for the smalls out there, if you do have a smart cyber person that's also working a contract, I just don't think that's tenable. I think this is a full-time effort initially, for sure. Then there's a lot of monitoring, a lot of maintenance, depending on how you implement it, but it's not a small effort.
Yeah, I think we just offered 3 perspectives from 3 different people that have tackled this in different ways or from different angles, right? From a provider's aspect, from the consulting aspect, and actually from being a DIB contractor aspect, which is something to take into consideration here and to think about that if you're in the audience. Not one of the 3 of us said this can be quick, easy, or anything like that, right? So if you're seeing anything that says this is quick, this is easy, this can be done in 72 hours. This can be done with this workaround or by changing this agreement, this services agreement with a highly prominent cloud platform. It cannot be done. It takes work, it takes time, it takes the development of processes and the change of culture. This isn't FUD, this is the truth. I don't speak FUD, I speak the truth. The truth is this takes time and it's not easy. I've done it multiple times and everybody on this call has experienced it. It is not an easy situation, but it can be done.
Very good. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Jacob, I'm gonna bring this next question to you, and if somebody else wants to weigh in, that the question is, and this is kind of foundational, probably should have opened with this, but the 3 different levels within CMMC. if somebody's watching this right now and they don't know where they fall into, can you give them a quick breakdown of how to get to, hey, I'm probably in this area and what that really means?
Oh, sure. You have 3 levels within CMMC 2.0, not 5, as some of our friends out in the LinkedIn space like to say. That was old. 3 levels. And CMMC level 1 has 15 security controls, and it's all about federal contract information, protecting that information. And so if you have the contractual clause FAR 52.204-21 in your contracts, and you really federal contract information is just that, contracts, pre-solicitation information. I have seen pre-solicitation information that was marked as CUI, so that's not always true, but in general, federal contract information is all about what CMMC level 1 covers. CMMC level 2, on the other hand, is a set of 110 security controls straight from NIST 800-171. And backing up a little bit, CMMC, NIST 800-171, it's all about the data, the controlled and classified information, the federal contract information. If your system holds it, then that would be what's called a covered system. So with that said, CMMC level 2, 110 security controls, all about protecting controlled unclassified information. CMMC level 1, stepping back a moment, all you have to do is perform a self-assessment and then do annual self-attestations. It's actually annual self-assessments and an attestation of compliance after that. There's no POAMs at level 1. You have to do it all and take care of that. CMMC level 2, you can, there will be a small minority of contracts that will support a self-assessment. I would not, I'm not a betting man, but I would not bet on, being able to get away with the self-assessment, because there will be other contracts that will have that third-party assessment requirement, and I just don't think you're going to be able to get away from it. So that's where the C3PAO comes in, and you are allowed to have a POAM at CMMC level 2 for certain controls, but you have to close it out within 180 days. And quick note, C3PAO has to be involved and perform that closeout assessment, so don't wait. If you have a POAM, get to work on it. CMMC level 3 is again for CUI, but for DoD's highest priority programs. Think weapon systems, stuff like that. DIBCAC will perform those assessments, and it's a set of 24 security controls from NIST 800-172. And that document is all about addressing advanced persistent threat. And I know Jason is very passionate about that document. That's all.
Yeah, I really enjoy 800-172. I like taking things to the next level and enhancing things. I wanted to kind of backpack on some of the stuff that you said about CMMC level 2 with regards to the self-assessment portion and the validated portion. So yeah, what's contractually required of you may be one or the other. It's a very slim chance. They're estimating like 4% of all contracts issued are going to need the self-assessment. And back in the day when this was first introduced, we were going through this series of meetings from the DoD CIO's office where the CISO, Dave McCune, was on the screen, and they were, basically the 3, Matt, you might remember that series of 3 separate webinars, and it was the same webinar, but it was a cap capacity, so they wanted to make sure everybody could get it. And basically they went through, and at one point it's called bifurcation, and bifurcation was gone, but it's still there. But don't bet on it is essentially the vibe that was given. And that's the advice that we probably should give, is that don't bet on it. And there's a couple reasons why. One, they're probably going to be few and far between. You have a better chance of seeing a unicorn. First and foremost, that's a really important thing to remember. The second part is that this is strictly the DoD's intent, right? The DoD is intending to put only a few of these self-assessed things in level 2. Now, there may be more, there may be less. As a part of your supply chain, you as the prime contractor in that supply chain is going to do what? Flow down these requirements to make sure your supply chain stays intact. And you may flow down these requirements, and you may be very strict and say that, well, we want everybody to be CMMC level 2 validated, right? Like third-party validation. And the reason why is because right now you don't necessarily touch CUI, but you're a part of our supply chain, you're a part of our mission. I got the presidential fingers going. And you're a part of our supply chain, you're a part of our mission, and we don't know what business in the future may bring. And when that business comes and we want to sign that contract, we don't want you and your level 2 self-assessment to be the reason why we can't get that contract, because you're going to be in the scope and the flow of our supply chain as a part of that contract. And there is nothing in the way from the government. There's no regulation that the government has put forward that regulates that exact situation. It is at the prime discretion.
That's the wild card, because initially when we were looking at this, it relied on the type of data you had. FCI level 1, done. CUI at least level 2, perhaps bifurcation. And you're right, that March town hall, they said it was dead, and then everybody went up in arms and they're like, oh, we were just kidding. It's still alive. And then level 3 for those organizations, probably 1,000, less than 1,000 of the overall total. But yeah, it was based on the type of data you had. Now the wild card is it could be flowed down from your prime. And so you might have a situation where if you're a sub and you're doing different work for different primes as part of their supply chain, this one might require level 2, this one might require level 1. So you're going to have these different requirements that would probably be flowed down from the primes. And I could very easily say that. I mean, what's the big FUD thing? You know, Target breached by the HVAC. Well, it was a supplier, right? It wasn't Target. And so to curb that, you're probably going to see Prime say, you know what, you want to be in our supply chain, level 2, validated with a C through PAO.
Well, what usually causes the chain reactions in the industry, right? Major events. So we have major breaches, major events, something happens, and all of a sudden we get an executive order and everybody's like, up in arms, let's do this, let's do that, right? And that's why we're going to have S-bombs for everything, right? That is kind of the world that we live in, is a reactionary world where the reaction is the most drastic thing that we can do. But then it turns out it's the most drastic thing that we can do, and it's drastic because nobody's been doing it. We probably should have been doing it for a long time. Just like asking people to take and adopt, and forcefully now making people adopt a cybersecurity regulation and standard that doesn't compete with the modern threat. But it's because we want these people to have a foundation in place, right, that at least is doing something. We talk about data is flying out the door at crazy rates from the defense industrial base. It's ruining our defense strategic advantage, right? That's what this data does for us in some cases. It gives us a strategic advantage against our adversaries. It allows us to defend ourselves. And what we're doing is we're basically like a Walgreens in San Francisco with the door wide open and people are walking out and security's doing nothing. But doing this and implementing these 110 controls to protect CUI, realistically, what you're doing is at least putting a lock on the door or some kind of stopgap, right? And then hopefully what this does is the snowballs for an organization, and it serves as a foundation for them to continuously grow. And it'll be incremental growth and incremental addition of defense in depth layers, right, to help deal with the modern threat. And how would you find out what you need to do? You can take in the enhancements of 172, like Jacob said, that I'm very passionate about. I love them. I think it's great to do them, and you should probably do them at the same time you do as 171 if you've got the money and the time, right? But if not, it should be part of your incremental growth, because those are the things, if you map them back to CISA recommendations, that are mapping back to recommendations and mitigations against our adversaries right now, and what their actions are. We're evaluating those and telling you what you should do. And you can map those things, the most current editions of those things, to CISA guidance that's been released within the past 5 years in 800-172.
Guys, what's going to happen to organizations that just don't meet the bar? They don't get there and the clock runs out on them. Is it they're going to lose their contracts with their primes or up the chain, or is there other repercussions that could come from this?
Short answer, yeah, you're going to lose the contract. And if you're one of those organizations that relies, heavily on those 2 or 3 government contracts in addition to the other work that you do, that could put you out of business. I've worked with some organizations that are like, you know what, we only have 1 DoD contract. It's just not worth it to us. We're getting out. And that's a business decision. I mean, that's a decision that you're able to make. But here's what I would say. If you make that decision, you're just prolonging the inevitable. We're already starting to see legislation come out that mentions our MSPs and their the requirement to disclose a breach within 72 hours. So it's coming. You're just kicking the can down the road. So I would spend the money to do it now. But yeah, it's a very real risk. You could lose the contract for sure.
Yeah. So another thing that may happen to you as an organization that we see, and Matt, I think you can relate to this, is that a lot of mergers and acquisitions. So organizations will eventually say that we're not going to do this. Do you want to buy this part of our business that deals with the defense? And they'll sell that to the person in the supply chain or another vendor or whatever it may be. The issues are going to come up with sole source providers. What happens, and we say this, right? What if you're a sole source provider and you don't do it? What happens when you don't do it? Like, is this going to be the modern standoff? You go first, I go first. What happens here? It needs to be done, but the problem is, in being a consultant, and when you deal with some of these organizations, it is very true that the opinion is that I'm either not going to do business with DoD or I'm going to make them prove it, right? And that is a terrible, especially with all the negative, impactful things that can happen to you, false claims, whatever it may be, associated with all of the DFARS compliance or CMMC compliance associated with it. Like, it's definitely prudent for you to heed the warning. It's not going anywhere. It's in defense strategies and things of that nature.
Yeah, my opinion here is that this, as we all know, this goes well beyond DoD, because NIST 800-171 is the federal standard to protect controlled and classified information. I think most agencies are requiring it via policy, but there is that contractual rule that's coming down that will add a contractual clause to implement NIST 800-171, just as the DFARS did years ago. So I like Matt said, and Jason mentioned, you're just not going to be able to get away from this. It's going to hit you. And if you choose not to work with DoDs today, well, what about, your other federal work? It's going to be coming. If you have that controlled and classified information, you're going to have to address it. The other thing I wanted to point out is that perhaps, another strategy you could take is perhaps you're a real small subcontractor and you're going to trust in the graces of your large prime to provide a system for you to operate in, but you better hope that you are so critical to that work that they can't do without you. I don't know how many people can say that. You're putting that's a big business risk. So just some things to consider.
Yeah, very true problem.
Matt, I wanted to go to you on MSPs and MSSPs and get your take on how does this factor in for organizations that are using these services? Are they having to reach out to these organizations and saying, okay, you need to be compliant as well as I do? How does that work?
Are you talking, is it related to CMMC?
Correct, yes.
Yeah, so when you read the rule states that your external service provider will need a particular level of a CMMC assessment done and then have that certified at that level prior to you as an organization seeking certification being assessed at a particular level. So I see that as somewhat problematic too, because first of all, the MSP is not a government contractor. So how does that work? And if the MSP has to be assessed and pass before the OSC does, that relies on the MSP's services, how does that work? Because then if the MSP doesn't pass, the OSC has zero chance of passing. So what does that look like? So there's some questions there, I think, that need to be sussed out. What I will say though is for those of you who are working with an MSP, ask the tough questions, make sure you're getting what you're paying for. When you look at the controls in 800-171, just go through the AC, the access control domain. How much of those practices in that domain are done by your MSP? Same thing with configuration management. How much is done by your MSP? Are they doing things? Are they doing shared accounts for things instead of having a unique account? Those questions really need to be asked of the MSPs. For those of you who are MSPs and want to live in that DoD space, get to it because you're going to need to be assessed according to the rule. And again, it's draft form, but you'll need to be assessed as an MSP prior to the OSC being assessed, and you'll need to pass. So we'll see how that works. I'm a little perplexed to how that's going to work. Jason, Jacob, anything to add?
All right, deep breaths.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there.
Let's strap in for this one. So there's part of a personal issue that I have here with this particular aspect of it, is when you're asking your MSPs the questions, like why should I have to ask my MSPs these questions? Because the amount of attack surface represented by a managed service provider, and if you're going to rob, if I told you that you could rob one bank and possibly get away with it, or rob one place that'll give you all the money for 10 banks, which one would you go after? The 10 banks, right? So the 10 banks is a managed service provider. The attack surface is larger because they have a gateway into multiple organizational systems. So make it worth your time when you're going and doing these things. As a threat actor, you're probably going to target MSP. So why do you not have basic protections in place if you know that that's what you hold? There's a few things that I would say that you would ask your MSP and be blunt about it. The first thing is that are you familiar, like, so let's say you're interviewing a new MSP or managed service provider, or you're talking to your managed service provider now. Are you familiar with CMMC, NIST 800-171, and DFARS compliance? Okay, yes, you're familiar. Okay, so you should know that these requirements are now going to be passed on to you based on the ruling that's come through there, because you want an MSP that's going to be on top of this, stay current with the industry that's particular to your individual organization. And then if they say yes, move on further with the conversation. If they say no, end the conversation. If they are your provider at that point in time and they don't have intentions, start moving the process to fire for cause, because you will fail.
Yeah, and the documentation aspect is where a lot of MSPs are woefully inadequate, and documentation is so important because those policies and procedures prove that you're implementing what you say you're implementing.
Right. Cannot agree more. Cannot agree
And
more.
another aspect of this is because a lot of people might be wondering, okay, we know ESPs, they're important, they have a lot of data, but it goes back to a scoping conversation. NIST 800-171 applies to CUI assets and assets that provide security protections. And security protections includes people, organizations, external organizations as well. And so from what I get from this is the DoD, their comfort level with external service providers is so low that they're saying CMMC level 2, self-assessment? No. We're going to require certification. We don't trust you just as much as they don't trust the DIB. So that's interesting. But the main thing I'll say here is that DoD needs to open up the gates. They need to let the MSPs in and get in early with the JSVA program. Today, I don't think that is the case today. So hopefully, because, I mean, it goes back to the old metaphor, the overused metaphor, the chicken and the egg. A lot of small businesses using MSPs, if MSPs cannot get certified, well, you're going to have a tough time.
So I would kind of argue that they're a little confident in MSPs and external service providers because the standard that they give them is not very strenuous based on the work that they do, and it doesn't carry enough weight to battle against advanced persistent threats, which is what would go after, right? So I think that it's actually a little bit more lenient than it probably should be for a managed service provider that deals with the DoD, especially when you think about how they treat their data, right? Where's our data have to be secured? FedRAMP or equivalent, and we could talk about that too. But you get what I'm saying? Like, so I think that they have been quite lenient with it. The other thing with it is that a while back, and Matt, you might fully remember this being a C3PAO, Edwards being a C3PAO, but there was these conversations about C3PAOs while we're waiting for the rule to happen and waiting for things to spin up to be able to perform. And this is a personal reflection. This isn't standard guidance or whatever. This is a personal thing, is that they would be able to perform 800-171 assessments, right? And those wouldn't be CMMC assessments. They wouldn't count as CMMC assessments, but it would be like an equivalency, right? And so what if the way, because it's going to be a huge bottleneck if we have to get all of these managed service providers certified before anybody else can get certified, or people are going to fail. Can't give them a contingent until you have something that's in place. And so what if the C3PAO started performing like 800-171 assessments, equivalency assessments for the managed service providers, and then those managed service providers at least have some confidence coming from somebody that's certified, verified by the Cyber AB to evaluate this standard, and at least go from there. At least you have something in place, because if not, exactly, I think it's the estimated number is like 78% of the DIB is dependent on a managed service provider of some extent. So 78% of 220,000 is putting you in the 170, 180,000 range. So 180,000 companies, their assessments are now dependent on somebody that we don't even know how they're getting assessed. So it has to be considered, has to be talked about. There's a lot in the rule that has to be talked about. It has to be really hashed out. It's the rule. I would say for the first pass, not a bad job. Would I expect it to change a whole lot? I don't know. It depends on how effective your comments are, and we talked about that before.
Good point. Good point. The rule, we got a question in, and I apologize to everyone. I forgot to mention this at the beginning, but on the right side of your screen, you can submit questions and comments, and someone from our team, if we can't answer them today, we will get back to you within a few days. But go ahead and submit those questions because we're coming up on the last quarter of the hour now. We do have a question. The rule discusses a phased rollout. Can you explain or articulate what that looks like?
Yeah, I'll do it. So effectively, once this rule's final and 48 CFR, which is the rule that goes along with putting this into contracts, this is final. This starts what we think is day one, right, or year one. Year one phase, there's a 7-year phased rollout. That phased rollout is intended not only to ease the process in and get it into contracts, but to also allow the cyber AP ecosystem to grow to absorb all the work that's going to need to be done, right? The assessor pool to get bigger so there's more organizations and things like that. Within the first 4 years of that program, there's an aggressive growth of this appearing in contracts and organizations being impacted. I think the number grows from year 1 to year 2 by 5x, from year 2 to year 3 by 3x, and then by 3x again from year 3 to year 4. And then that's what they call the cap period, from year 4 to year 7. Cap period means they don't expect a huge turnover of organizations leaving or joining the defense industrial base at that point in time at year 4 to year 7. So they think that it's going to average out at about 24,000 or something like that. It's crazy numbers. And so that's the 7-year phased rollout period and how it impacts people. That's the government. Again, we talked about this earlier. That's the government's intention. If I'm a prime contractor right now, and I know the government's going to give me a CMMC clause within the next year at the earliest, right? I'm now managing, if I'm not doing it already, my supply chain and making sure that my business can still function and we meet all the requirements that we have to meet. Because if you don't win the contract.
Yeah, and
so
it's funny. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so I would imagine movement from your prime coming before you see movement from the government. And I would imagine it happening even more frequently now because now there's something to back it up. Before it was just this myth of CMMC, right? This big cloud that everybody knew was coming. We saw the tea leaves, but there was really nothing that was like, okay, this is actually going to happen. There were still people that were pundits that were saying not going to happen. And then you start seeing it in strategies. You start seeing rules come to fruition. You start seeing programmatic rules establishing everything. And now you know it is kind of a real thing. So primes are now going to move the channel. I mean, before the rule happened, I've been on webinars that were hosted by prime organizations, and their direction was, we aren't going to make a move on this because we don't know if it's real. I've also been on webinars where the prime has said that I want you to flow down this clause in every single one of your subcontracts without any remorse. We want our supply chain to be at this level. Now, where's the median in there? Because I think both of them are extreme, right? One of them, you're just going to fall off the cliff without security protections. The other one, if you go to do that, you're going to fall off a cliff because your supply chain is going to start to deplete because it's not realistic for everybody to be at that point. So you really need to control the flow. And if CUI is not going somewhere, don't give somebody a level 2 requirement. The disruption of operations can be a big deal, right? Like you want whatever measures that you can have in place, but don't flow down when it's not necessary.
Yeah, and I'll just add this really quick. It's funny, I just finished up my CMMC timeline lecture for the course, so I have it up here. And adding to what Jason said, 4 phases. Phase 1 is when CMMC rollout begins, and that will actually begin right after the Title 48 rule goes into effect. And that is a future rule that's coming out that will revise DFAR 7021, which is the clause we'll see in contracts requiring CMMC. Phase 1, basically, they're going to start requiring CMMC level 1 and level 2 self-assessments. 6 months after that, phase 2 will kick in 6 short months. Phase 2 will kick in, and that's when we'll start seeing CMMC level 2 certification requirements in contracts. They do have discretion to delay to option exercises of a contract, and they do have discretions to kick in CMMC level 3 certification in phase 2. A year later, phase 3 begins. CMMC level 2 certification is in really all contracts and option exercises, CMMC level 3 certifications and contracts. They do have discretion to delay level 3 to an option exercise. A year later, phase 4, CMMC's everywhere, can't get away from it. And I would say by phase 2, 6 months short months after that, you're going to start seeing it pretty heavy. And then phase 3 really is when you can't get away from CMMC level 2. That's my opinion.
Did I say phases or years when I was talking about it? I think I said years. It's phases.
You said both. It works.
No, yeah. Just lump them in together. Just do it.
It all starts.
Another question that might be good for this group, and anybody can jump on this one. If someone wants to ensure their personnel are adequately knowledgeable about the NIST requirements and everything outside of hiring one of our organizations, is there any training materials that are out there? Or is there any websites or anything they can start consuming one by one? And I know what you guys are laughing about, but let's go ahead and answer that question as best we can anyway.
Yeah.
Well, I know a guy.
Go ahead.
I know a guy who teaches CCP and CCA classes, CMMC certified professionals and assessor classes. That'd be me. Edwards has CCP and CCA classes. I would strongly recommend taking a CCP course. It's a 5-day boot camp. We cover all 110 controls in our CCP course, which sort of differentiates us from some of the others, because the requirement is only a CCP does level 1, right? The 17 in level 1, but we teach all 110 because we know that either the person who's taking the class wants to go on to be an assessor, so then they'll go on and take their CCA. They may be a representative of their organization, so somebody in the organization has sort of that SME, or they work for a consultant. And maybe they were a registered practitioner, but they want more knowledge. So that's what I would recommend. We always have 2 instructors at each time, and there's probably 5 or 6 different instructors that you may see throughout the week. Names that you'll know, I won't name drop, but names that you know in the industry that teach that. That's what I would recommend. We do have a guided learning that is a self-paced CCP course now. You can sign up for that, and if you can't, do a 5-day Monday through Friday, you can sign up for the guided learning. And then we're teaching the CCP course for the CIC conference in March in San Diego. So if you got some extra money laying around and you want to go to the beach, go to a CCP course, you can do that out in San Diego. We'll have an in-person live course there too. And if Jason and Jacob, if you say anything else, no, I'm kidding.
No, I can't say anything else. I'm a Edwards Performance Solutions student. I had to go through the whole training to get my certification. So I'm biased, I guess. I can't give you, listen, aside from becoming a CCP, which if you've heard me ever talk about this, the progression is I think every organization needs one inside their organization if they have CMMC requirements, at least one, because if you hire only one, usually he's going to get poached and hired somewhere else for more money. So you want to get as many people as you can that are trained in this to understand it, because a lot of your business depends on it, right? So like, even if you're not going to be a practitioner per se, and you're not going to assess things, and you're not going to perform consulting work, for the good of your organization, it's probably beneficial to get as much training as possible. We would be remiss if we don't mention that the Cyber AB does have training that's available at a cost that takes time that you have to fill out, but those aren't certifications. Those are just things to familiarize yourself. The DivCS program also offers Project Spectrum. Project Spectrum is a resource. It is, if you go in with expectations that you won't be a CMMC expert after you're done with it, I'm sure that it's one of those like scratch the surface. I like to refer to it as I stayed at a Holiday Inn Express last night for CCPs. And so you basically have this general understanding associated with it, but it's not enough for you to help your organization fully implement. I've been through every level of training thus far, with the exception of one, which is the certified assessor, and that's next on the hit list. And I've been through every level of training, and I can tell you from experience that they progress from stage to stage. You learn more from stage to stage. You are a better practitioner as you progress and learn from stage to stage.
Yeah, what I'll add is GRC Academy has a CMMC overview training course for defense contractors. And it's an overview course, just around 3 hours. I'm almost done with my CMMC 2.0 course update. Should be done by the 21st. So very happy and excited about that to get my evenings and weekends back. But yeah, folks, it's I've gotten excellent feedback. If you want a perspective from someone in the DIB, this is a great way to start. What I will say, Matt, I've heard amazing things about your curriculum over at Edwards, actually in CCP course this week with Corinne Wise. Yeah, I think that my course is a good primer for CCP. If you're not familiar with CMMC, definitely recommend following on with CCP because you will get that assessor detailed knowledge. Matt, there's definitely, there's room for both of us, buddy.
Jacob, I'm so sorry. I didn't see you on screen, and I forgot GRC Academy, which is a great resource. If
No
you
problem.
read anything, if you literally listen, I'm not trying to backtrack here and get back in good graces. Okay,
Sure.
If you read any feedback, it's important to do due diligence and research whenever
Yes.
you go through any of this. Read feedback as regards to the things, and you can go to LinkedIn, which is a very good resource. Follow any one of us, but you can go to LinkedIn and see, just type in stuff about Edwards classes and what people think about it, or GRC Academy, what people think about it. Then type in things about Project Spectrum and see what people think about that. So like that's it. But that's the thing is that like there's a lot of quality resources as long as you do the research. It's worth investing the money. It's beneficial for your organization, and we all, I guess, have experience with it.
Very good. Guys, we've got just a couple minutes left. I thought we might be able to sneak in one last question. Somebody came back. I know we talked a little bit about this before. I believe it's around the MSP stuff. What is the FedRAMP equivalent memo? Can somebody define that a little bit better, or
Please let me.
A whole big topic.
I was going to say, I'll take up the next 4 minutes. Go ahead, Jason. Here's what I will say. I don't think there's such a thing as FedRAMP equivalency. That's my take. Go ahead, Jason.
So I won't take up a full 4 minutes. I worked in FedRAMP before I became a consultant with the government. I worked performing FedRAMP packages. I have done quite a few of them. FedRAMP equivalency requires you to be 100% compliant with the baseline. I have never seen a 100% compliant FedRAMP solution. Period. So what does that take? And I posted about this on LinkedIn. What does that mean? What could you take from that? Is that the DoD is saying that we are not comfortable with anything but FedRAMP solutions for our data to be stored in. And that's the person that's making the decision. You want something to store our data in that's not FedRAMP equivalent? Make it more secure. Give us the validation and make sure that it's in documentation. So if something happens for legal purposes, we know you're responsible. So that's it, not the full 4 minutes. It exists. There's a memo, but I think the memo exists because the masses were asking for it from the DoD, and DoD was like, here you go. And I said something to a comment on LinkedIn about this when somebody was talking about the memo, and it's like the starving person. If there's a starving person on the side of the road and you're walking down the road and they ask you for food because they're hungry, if you give them rotten food, are you helping them? And it's like the rotten food adjective. It's there. Memo exists. How many equivalents will we see? I'd shave my head if we saw more than 2. And if we saw 2, I'd still probably shave. If we saw less than 2, I'd still shave my head.
All right, guys. Well, we'll wrap it up there. I appreciate all 3 of you joining and contributing today, and everyone who joined. We've got someone from our organization that's going to be following up with everybody who attended, and we want to say thank you one last time for joining, and have a great day.
Yeah.
Have fun, folks.